The movie begins with a bunch of college kids enjoying themselves at a party on a beach. They indulge in all sorts of drinking activities that will either end up with them throwing up or have a horrible hangover the next morning. In their frenzy, the friends shoot embarrassing videos of each other's nip-slips, drinking in sorrow, and all sorts of wild acts. Everybody is busy enjoying and dancing when two boys, Vance and Gilbert, carry a weird-looking ball that looks like a neutered dinosaur's leftovers, covered in a gooey substance. They leave it near the bonfire and forget about it. Another guy, Mitch, asks everybody to put their phones in a bag that he locks in the car's trunk so they can be true to the spirit of Vegas, of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. The next morning, Kaylee and Mitch wake up in a lifeguard shack. Kaylee instantly regrets sleeping with Mitch to get over her boyfriend Jonah, and Mitch tries to be more supportive of her and asks her not to think much about it. Jonah wakes up in the driver's seat of his convertible alongside his new girlfriend Shonda. Vance and his girlfriend Ronnie are still sleeping in the back seat. A few meters ahead on a picnic table, Marcia sleeps topless. Shonda wakes her up after calling her a few times, and Marcia instantly gets sick because of excessive drinking the previous night. Meanwhile, Kaylee looks around and finds clothes and towels lying all over the beach. She also sees the dinosaur family jewel cracked in half and spots a bird that, shockingly, disappears in the sand. Sensing an impending doom, Kaylee warns Marcia to stay out of the sand, but Marcia is too dazed to comprehend anything. She gets off the table and immediately gets stuck in the sand. Visibly discombobulated, she calls for help, and Vance steps out of the car but face plants as soon as his feet touch the sand. He cries as if in excruciating pain, and his friends panic. Jonah tries to start the car, but it won't start as they left the headlights on the entire night, killing the battery. Mitch tries to help Vance by throwing a life buoy that he found in the shack, but it's too late. The friends look in horror as numerous thin, string-like sinews attach themselves to Vance and Marcia's flesh, skinning them alive in the process. The two friends soon get sucked into the sand, leaving the others devastated and worried for their own safety. As they are trying to wrap their heads around what caused the sand to devour their friends, they agree to blame the government, oil, and chemicals for what just happened. Shonda argues that they need to call the police and asks for her phone, but they realize the phones are in the trunk. Just then, they hear Gilbert shouting from a short distance. He has been shoved inside a barrel and asks them to help him get out of it. They shout at him, pleading not to step on the sand, and after telling him that the hair-like things in the sand took the lives of their friends, hairless Gilbert stops struggling. They wait for help to arrive in the sweltering sun, but thanks to Kaylee, who finds a sunblock in the shack, the friends can rule out sun damage from their list of problems. While trying to figure out what caused all their friends to die, Kaylee brings their attention to the cracked, egg-like structure, and Mitch immediately recognizes it as the weird thing Gilbert and Vance had found last night. Their worst fears come true when they realize whatever was inside has hatched and buried itself inside the sand. The situation seems to have hampered everybody's mental capacity to think logically, except for Kaylee, who again comes up with an ingenious idea of throwing hot dogs on the sand to see how big the creature is. One by one, the hot dogs CGI disappear into the sand. She's unable to throw very far, and Mitch offers to throw one, which attracts a seagull that gets devoured by the sand as Gilbert watches in horror. However, when they throw one of the hot dogs in the other direction, it stays on the surface, indicating the monster hasn't reached that area. They all rejoice momentarily, and Jonah decides to cover the distance using his surfing boards. He places the boards one after the other and carefully makes his way. Jonah finally reaches the last step. Before he can hop onto the picnic table, the board slides from under his feet. As his body dangles between the sliding board and the table, the hair-like tentacles reach out to grab Jonah, but he manages to pull himself up on the table before loudly crying in pain. The tentacles have injured his stomach, which starts bleeding, and he screams in pain as the poison spreads. Jonah finds respite in his friend's words and composes himself. He searches the bag on the table and accidentally drops a banana, but quickly grabs it before the tentacles appear. Something catches his attention, and after determining that the tentacles don't appear near the area where they had a bonfire last night, he deduces the creature dislikes fire. To prove his point, he steps into the ash-covered area to everybody's shock, but nothing happens to him. The friends notice Jonah's wounds have been infected and starts oozing pus, and he starts throwing up as he feels sick. But with a bit of motivation from Kaylee, Jonah climbs back on the table and looks in the bag to find a few drinks that he hands over to his friends. However, when he tries throwing a can at Mitch, the blisters formed on Jonah's stomach start bursting with CGI blood, and he groans in pain. The pain is too much for him to bear, and he lies down on the table. Determined to get out of there, Ronnie dares to step on the hood of the car to manually open the trunk with the keys and retrieve their phones so they can call for help. But as she does, the numerous tentacles puncture the tires. After a few suspense-filled near falls, Ronnie finally does fall on the trunk and crushes her own fingers. Ronnie screams in pain and frustration probably as the others spot a beach patrol car and yell for help, no longer seemingly needing the phones she broke her hand for. But looking at their condition and hearing their claims about killer sand, the officer thinks the group is high. Ignoring all their warnings about not stepping on the sand, the officer gets out of his car, but nothing happens. His leather boots are protecting him from the tentacles. He suddenly assumes the role of a hypercritical auntie and starts judging the group's plight. He even goes on to ask Shonda and Ronnie if they're a couple. Kaylee has had enough, and she gets into an argument with the officer, but he continues mocking them and asks Kaylee to get down the shack. She refuses, and irked by her non-complying behavior, the officer takes out his pepper spray but accidentally drops his keys. As soon as he grabs his keys, his hand gets stuck and his entire arm is pulled into the sand. He tries using pepper spray, which works, but by then he has already lost his arm, with the wound spurting blood. With his entire body touching the sand, the tentacles attach themselves to him and start pulling him into the sand. Kaylee quickly grabs the pepper spray from the officer's hand seconds before he is devoured. Mitch gets an idea, and he grabs his flip-flops and plans to wrap a towel around his feet and run towards the safe area to get his car, and he can come back to get them. He asks Shonda to throw the towels towards him, and as he leans to catch the second towel, the wooden railing breaks and he falls into the sand. The tentacles immediately attach to him and numb him before piercing through his body, leaving a bloody mess behind. The CGI guy for this movie really loves his blood spurts. Kaylee wipes her tears before continuing with their plan. She breaks the remaining wooden rails and throws them in Shonda's direction. Kaylee makes a difficult jump from the shack to the car and punches Shonda for stealing her boyfriend. Then they immediately make up as saving themselves is the priority. Together, they help free Ronnie's hand from the trunk, and using the rails, Shonda balance walks towards Jonah. They seem to have forgotten the towel and feet plan. She asks Kaylee to hurry, and Ronnie too thinks she should go first, as the blood from Ronnie's wounds might attract the monster. Kaylee makes it to the table and tends to Jonah. Ronnie is next, and she successfully makes it to the edge, but the blood dripping from her hand distracts her, and she falls. But before she can hit the sand, Kaylee uses pepper spray on the sand. Ronnie falls and rejoices when nothing happens, but not for long. As only some portion of the sand is saturated in the spray, she too gets pulled in the sand. Shonda finally remembers Mitch's plan and ties her feet with a towel and a bag. She sprints on the sand and in no time reaches the patrol car. Meanwhile, Gilbert tries to pull himself out of the dump can, but his belly has started to bleed from scraping on the sharp edges of the can, and it drips from the sides of the barrel. This attracts the monster, and the tentacles pierce through the bottom of the can into Gilbert's body, and longer, broader, jelly-like tentacles emerge, pulling Gilbert into the sand, leaving behind, you guessed it, a blood spurt. The monster doesn't stop there and shoves the patrol car, making Shonda lose balance and fall on her head, which makes her lose consciousness. Kaylee has no other option but to stay beside Jonah and cry. The sun soon sets, and Shonda finally wakes up to Kaylee screaming her lungs out. After she regains her composure, she climbs onto the car's roof and finds a raft. She lowers it to the ground and inflates it, making a perfect bridge for Kaylee and Jonah to reach the car. Shonda helps them hop onto the raft, opens the car door to let herself in, and pulls Jonah inside. Once he's seated, Kaylee follows, and as Jonah screams in pain, Kaylee gives him her magical kiss that makes him stop screaming. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shakes, and a huge, glowing tentacle springs out of the sand and attacks Kaylee, who could have been in the car if she hadn't stopped to perform her magic on Jonah. But because of the impact, she is thrown onto the raft and the car door shuts. To save herself, Kaylee hops on the hood and climbs the truck's roof and tries to untie the gasoline cans tied at the car's rear, but the tentacle deprives her of one container as it hurls it away. She gets lucky on the second one and empties it on the ground near the tentacle. Before it can attack her again, she uses the matchsticks she picked up earlier from one of the bags and lights the ground on fire. The tentacle too catches on fire, and while the monster struggles to douse the fire, Kaylee gets inside the car. The girls shriek and cry as several glowing tentacles try to attack them. Luckily, they were able to lock the car door from inside, which prevented the tentacles from reaching them. And soon, it is all over, as the monster and the tentacles just vanish. Unfortunately, Jonah doesn't make it, and the two girls cry, holding each other. They soon fall asleep in the car, hoping someone will probably come to get them out of there the next day. The following day, a surfer sees them sleeping in the car and knocks on the window. The girls get startled and soon wake up to see someone standing on the sand. Kaylee opens the door and, without thinking much, steps on the sand, confirming the monster is gone. She coaxes Shonda to step out, and the two clutch onto each other and walk away. When the surfer turns to wake Jonah, seeing his pale white skin and the nasty wound, he realizes that Jonah is long gone. He is stunned that the girls spent the night trapped in a car with his corpse. As they walk, we see an indentation on the beach, showing how big the monster was before it left. It is revealed that the monster is a huge jellyfish that is quickly making its way to another beach full of humans for its next course of meal. And that's a wrap for this movie recap. Thanks for watching.